Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. We're going to be talking about teamwork today. I know so many of us are lone wolves out there, but at some time, some way, we're all part of a team. It might be a loosely coupled team, or it might be very tightly coupled. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, please check out Co-Video. Co-Video is the way to connect with people today. Video email is crushing it today. Tell them Brian sent you over from the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. Also, Pipedrive and the Brutal Truth, all one word coupon will get you 60 days of access to Pipedrive. And it has all that email tracking that you have to pay for otherwise, scheduling stuff that you have to pay for otherwise. All of that stuff's included, and you need your own CRM. Why? Because we're salespreneurs today. Let's get into the interview. I'll sum it up at the end and give you an update on the courses for everybody's in it. Here we go. Hey, Jason, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm an executive coach. I work with individuals in teams on how to maximize their leadership and productivity.
And how'd you get interested in this?
Well, I've been working in Silicon Valley for a long time, and I got to work with some fantastic leaders such as Steve Jobs, Mark Cuban, Mark Hurd at HP, Reed Hastings, who's the CEO of Netflix, and just, working with all of those people, I was fascinated about leadership, productivity, and what makes certain teams get to the highest levels and other ones not. And, over the years, I just decided that I wanted to go on my own, and I started dabbling this on the side, and then, wrote a book and went in full bore.
Yeah. But like, what role were you in before? Was it a management consultant?
Yeah, I was doing marketing. I was doing marketing leadership position. So I worked in an agency, and I worked on site with, quite a few large organizations in technology. Yeah. I mean, pretty much. I very close relationships at like Microsoft, Oracle, and so I knew the space inside and out pretty cold, and so it had fascinated me to understand how all of these things sort of interoperated. I mean, I think I'm a geek at heart in terms of learning and human behavior and trying to figure out how things work.
And that excited you a lot more than marketing? You kidding?
It did. Yeah, it did. And you know what? I think it was at some point the politics of the organizations I was in and the things that happened. And I always told people that if perhaps I were in a different setting with different people, it may have played itself out differently. I just think at some point I started to realize that this politic game was not really the thing that I wanted to have to do all the time. And everything was dependent on other people and my role being safe.
Yeah.
And that just was something that started to get really old. And then I knew that I would have to go back to Silicon Valley if I wanted to go back and get into marketing, because I live in Dallas now. And I was like, I really don't want to have to go and move back. And so it was all these things sort of came at one time.
Yeah. Hey, you wrote a great post on LinkedIn about building a highly effective team. What inspired you to do that?
Well, 3 years ago, one of the things I was looking for was I wanted to do a TED Talk, and I wanted to really dive into an area that I thought would really help a lot of people. And so helping teams really get to the next level was something that I was fascinated about. So I did a lot of research on them and trying to understand what are the levers, the buttons, the human behavior, the mindsets, emotions that really maximize and separate the top 1% from all the rest. And as I did research and I've sat in and now probably close to 100 different teams and watched them and interacted with them, I started to realize and understand that most of everything that we understand and believe about how to build extraordinary teams is wrong. And what you'll read is if you go to like Inc. or Entrepreneur Magazine or Forbes or Fortune, you'll have a successful person interview talk about how they built their culture. And the problem is with that is they back out their success. Yeah. And you can't replicate that across different organizations. So my belief is, and it's, same thing with what you do, right? If you can't operationalize it, then there's a problem, because then you don't have a system and a process that anyone can use and replicate. And I find that the problem is people talk about culture and they get all mushy and they talk about emotions and feelings and, other things. And I don't really believe that it's about any of that, in the sense that people are people and they follow predictive habits. And just like you would do in a sales process to maximize production, productivity, and effort, is the same way you can with culture. It's just that people want to make it mysterious because it requires them to look deep inside themselves, and it's a hard lever to pull.
So how do you do that with people? What's the journey that you take them through?
Well, I think the first thing is to really understand why, when you get a group of people, how do they do great things? So I ask people a question. Think about the best team you've ever been on, right? Personally or professionally, I don't care when it is in your life. And think about that closeness, that connection, and whatever you accomplished and the odds that you overcame, right? And I said, that feeling that you have inside of you is what business leaders and CEOs stay awake at night, and they try to figure out, how can I create that across my organization? Because if I can engender that feeling, I will get people to be fully engaged, working at their highest productivity, collaboration, and in turn, my organization will be able to be a giant, and we'll be able to crush everyone in our path, no matter whether we're 3 people or 100,000. And so I think what people forget is that how we build relationships in our personal life is the same way they're done in business, because they're all people.
Yeah.
And the key is that just like great salespeople build great relationships with people, that they care about them, they try to build value, with everything else, that's the way a team works. And so you just have to create that across the whole team and organization as a leader, and create that belonging, because belonging is the core driver of us as human beings. And when you create that, you can't break that bond. And that's what people search their whole lives for. That's why people get married. That's why people have relationships and kids and friends, is to feel that sense. So you have to be able to engender that in an organization on a really deep level. So one of the myths people have that run businesses is that, you separate your personal and business life. And my belief is, and all the research and all the data point to the fact that that is not true at all. And the more you get people to know each other on a personal level, the more your revenue and all your metrics will significantly increase, because you create caring in those relationships. And when you think about it, probably one of the biggest drivers in business is not wanting to disappoint other people. You'll do anything at that point to not have that feeling that you let someone down that you care about. And that's really the core thing. When I talk to even my clients about, interviewed the people that they work for and why they love working for them. And I was just trying to figure out what the answer was. And they either said that to me, or they said it, in terms that I could come back to on the disappointment level.
Now, does it all come back to that tribal nature of us from thousands of years ago?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And that's the way our brain works. And it really hasn't evolved that far. So what you have to understand is that you have to create high levels of trust with people. And if you can create that, then great things will happen, right? I mean, Harvard did a 11-year study in 200 companies, and the companies that had, strong culture, their net operating income increased by 756% versus ones that didn't. It was 1%. I saw another study that, they did a similar study with companies that had strong company cultures. Over a 3-year period, they look at their share price, and it went up 147% compared to those who had a medium or, poor performing culture internally. And there's so many metrics around that. It's It's pretty ridiculous.
Well, I think certainly for anyone who's experienced it either on a sports team or in a company, which I have, and I think there's a couple of things that I experience, and you can give me your feedback. Is it some purpose, some us against them, some competition, some value, certainly from the military. If you look at the elite squads, everybody is rewarded and punished regardless of who does something good or bad. And that what they're trying to do is make sure that everyone understands that they're in it together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I have a friend of mine that is on SEAL Team 7, and it's the movie with American Sniper, Chris Kyle. He was after him, but on the same, the top Navy SEALs team. And one of the interesting things is how they talk about trust with each other, right? It was unwavering trust and belief that superseded everything else. And one of the research studies that I found as I was looking through this process was a study Google did, and it's called Project Aristotle, and they were looking how to build a perfect team. And they had a lot of assumptions on how to do this because one of the things they found was their top performing teams their revenue production was 19% greater than ones who weren't, and their poorest ones, it was minus 19. So it was like a 38% spread. And they also found the top teams were twice as often recommended by Google executives for doing extraordinary work. So they wanted to operationalize this across the entire globe, obviously for the bottom line. And so they hired researchers and they did a couple-year study, and they were looking at every factor that you could ever imagine. And the interesting thing was they found nothing that you'd think of. Not individual performance, IQ, EQ, background, where they went to school, anything else mattered. The number one factor across every single high-performing team that they found was psychological safety. Yeah. And that really fascinated me, right? Because psychological safety, fancy word, is interpersonal risk-taking. But when you break it down, it is three components. One, people know each other in a deep personal way. They know each other inside and out, what's going on in their own lives. Two, they're able to take risks, fail, and do it in an objective measure where they're not getting slapped down. They can throw out crazy ideas inside of the team, and that's actually rewarded. And the third thing is they can ask any question they want, right? Like in school, you learn teachers say the stupid questions are the ones that you don't ask. Well, then when you ask clarifying questions, you're clear on what it is that you need to do and how you need to go about doing it, so you make far fewer mistakes on obvious pieces of information. So that's it.
And this flies absolutely in the face of what's going on today, doesn't it?
It completely does. And that's why you're seeing all these teams. It's why I say to people that 99% of teams underperform. And when you go to sales leaders, because I went into most of Forbes and Fortune's top 10 workplaces, because my premise was if I go to these teams and I look in them and there's some objective measure that someone's looked at them and ranked them at least, I should be able to find patterns inside of these companies that would make some sense. And I should be able to find people operating at extraordinary levels. And what I found was just the opposite, right? Yeah. You had very few teams operating at extremely high levels. And the funny thing is when you talk to sales leaders or people about it, they'll give you answers like, well, they just get it more. They're smarter. They know how to perform. They have grit. They have tenacity. And while those things may be true, it actually isn't the evidence that how these teams are created and what goes on.
Right, and just the whole concept of the tour of duty view of the world,
yes.
The gig economy, the plug and play of people, and how we started the interview and why you left marketing, because I constantly see it where it's all about politics rather than the accomplishment of the objective as a team. And when you talk about personal security and sales, I can't imagine a profession with less personal security than sales.
No, but you don't have to have it like that. What's interesting to see And so some of the characteristics of these top sales teams as I watch them, and it's really funny because just like in any other system, it's the same across every team, right? I mean, and now I tell people, if I can go into a sales team and I can watch their team meetings or them tackle a problem, I can tell you at what percent of the bell curve they're on just by watching them and not even talking to them. Because what you'll see is a few things. One, you will see them have great eye contact. You will not see them on their phones near as much, on their laptops. They will be engaged in team meetings. They will be talking to each other. They'll be asking each other what's going on. I saw people who actually were giving each other like hugs, and like one person went over to one group and said, "Hey, I see something's wrong. You're not yourself." Like they were emotionally connected and engaged, and they had fantastic eye contact, and that shows people that you care. The other thing that I saw, obviously, was deep personal connections, right? And as I did talk to people, these people knew each other inside and out. They knew if they were having family problems, their life history, where they grew up. You also saw that they would be doing things like listening to podcasts, reading, and bringing that information back to the group. And then another thing I saw was that if there were 10 people in a group and the sales leader would throw out a question, all of them would answer. Yeah. And they would all talk in relatively the same increments. And as you got down the levels of the team, if you got to a 50% team on the ranking scale, you'd find probably 5 people out of the 10. And when you went down to 20%, you'd see 2. And I saw that in almost every single team. And the last thing you saw was they would be helping each other out. Like I heard stories about some people helping each other on sales presentations at like 1 a.m. And the other person had no vested interest. There was no quota they were getting. There was no money. But because someone on their team needed help and they knew a particular area really well, they helped them hone their presentation in, right? So like, no wonder why they're winning and they're the top team over and over again. If you have 10 smart people helping each other and caring about each other and helping support them even during difficult times in their life, right? I mean, that only would make logical sense. And you saw less and less of that down every other team. And then I did an experiment where with one of my friends who has a very, very large sales team stratified, we took a couple people off their medium performing team, about the 50% team, and put them on the top team. And I said, just put them on the team for 90 days and let's see what happens. No extra training, no integration. Just tell the team that these people are on here to kind of learn and you think that they have potential, but that's it. And then leave it at that. And what we found after 90 days on his team is they increased their quota by 20%. And there was no reason. There was no reason. They couldn't figure out any way via the numbers and the deals in the pipeline, and he looked over it and the projections were right and there was nothing else and they could not explain it. And I said, the answer is when you're on a team like that, it brings out the best in you because they raise your performance.
Yeah. Instead of the carrot and stick management approach that is kind of ubiquitous in sales, where it's like you survive or you die, and regardless of your territory or the amount of help you have, the ramp time, the resources you're given, and the idea of you're irreplaceable like a tool.
Yeah, and it doesn't work, and it's really interesting. So, I always say this stuff is well and good, but then the question comes to how do you actually make it real? And so as I was doing my TED Talk, I was like, well, this is great, but I need to actually create something that people can use and actually do this for free that anyone could use to get their results, no matter what team, where they're in the world, or what's going on. So I was looking around and I came across a research study by Professor Arthur Aaron back in 1997. And he was looking on how do we build really close best friendships or interpersonal relationships, right? And literally you'd snap your fingers and create a best friendship. Relationships that would take an average person 5, 10, 15, 20 years to make. You could do it that fast. And so what he did was he took 54 grad students he put them in a room. They were complete strangers. They did not know each other. The only thing they knew before they sat down across the table from each other was their name, because they introduced each other. And over 45 minutes, they asked each other 36 questions. And these questions were pretty vulnerable, right? Question number 9 or 10 was, tell me 3 things that you like about me, which is challenging since you knew that person probably a total of 6 minutes hearing them speak. And at the end of 45 minutes, they surveyed all of the people, and 30% of the people said they created the closest relationship in their life. Think about that. You go in line at Starbucks, and once or twice a week, you make a new best friend in 45 minutes. I mean, and they did this study now dozens of times, right? And they started it pre-social media. And they've gotten the same results across all geographies and all age groups, backgrounds, and it just consistently works. So what I did was I just did this in a group setting, right? So now you use this game, Cards Against Mundanity, and you put it in a group setting, and it creates psychological safety and trust inside of people in that fast. And you just do it inside of groups, because then if you do it in a group, you find out you may have similar experiences to people, but the key is you align yourself with people because of the emotions. If they mention a loss and you have a loss, that immediately galvanizes you.
On commonality, and the second thing, if you look at how do you become part of someone's tribe, it's not by taking something from them, it's giving something to them.
Yes.
And telling somebody what you like about them is giving them something, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And the key thing is, and I think this is where people get this backwards, is that how you build high levels of trust is through vulnerability.
Yeah.
And being really vulnerable. You know, the other example I give to people is that you've had to have this experience at least once or twice in your life where you've run into someone. You've had a 5 or 10 minute conversation, you feel like you've known them all their life. Because I ran into people and I started to ask them, what questions and what did you talk about? And they got really deep and really personal and very vulnerable really quickly. And I said, don't you see what just happened? Because you both were vulnerable, you basically had a conversation that most of the time takes 10 meetings with someone to do. You did it within the first 10 minutes. And that is why you felt like that. And so the key is that someone has to lead with vulnerability and sharing, and it needs to be you.
Yeah. Because
otherwise, the reason it's only happened a few times for you is because it's haphazard. And it's the same thing in business. If you want to do it, then you have to create it, you have to lead with it, and you have to explain with people that a core value is psychological safety and belonging in this organization, because it's good for you personally, it's good for you professionally, and it's good for our profit and revenue, which is good for everyone.
Yeah, and it's not something that you have to earn. It's something that you're entitled. No, entitled's the wrong word, but it's something that you give to them, because you don't make your child earn your love, right?
Exactly.
And the parents who try that usually don't have kids that stay around long.
Yeah. But it's the same thing with sales, right? Because, I mean, if you're working with a client, right, on the other side of things, if you start to use – so I had salespeople who will use the game, and they'll use it at the end of the first prospect meeting with people. They're saying, hey, I want to play a game with you to get to know you a little better, and start asking some questions, and they both answer it. And the people that I've been using it are having great success. Why? Because they're building rapport. They're building relationships. They're getting to know them. Right now, it's what a great salesperson does anyways, but they're doing it unconsciously. But this makes the process more conscious. And then as the people are doing this, they're seeing it, wow, this makes a lot of sense. It makes my job easier because now I'm creating all these advocates and people who like me. And because they know me, and I'm not waiting for some chance thing to share who I am and have them open up. I'm actually making it part of the sales process. And you can do that obviously in any team.
Yeah. I mean, what is more flattering than somebody showing interest in you as a human being, not as a customer, not as a mark, not as somebody to elicit a purchase order from, but somebody who's a human being.
Right. And it goes back to the saying everyone's saying now, add value, add value. Well, you know what? The biggest value you can add to someone is making them feel like they belong and feeling like you care about them without being attached to some outcome.
Yes.
And how you actually help yourself not get attached to, I just got to close this deal, is to start asking people questions like, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned in the last year? And the great thing about when you take out a game too, which I find is really interesting and why it works so much better than just randomly asking questions, is when you play a game, it brings people back to childhood. They don't question it. They just answer the questions because there's no agenda.
Yeah.
Because you're pulling it out of something else and you're showing the person that I'm not just making this up. Someone else really has it and they don't sit there and think about it. But if you just ask people random questions, what I found out initially when I was asking people what was running through their mind is our brains are wired for negativity. And they're wired to question because they're still in survival mode, like we talked about in tribal time. So people will say to themselves, why are they asking me this question? What are they trying to do? What's the point? But it's funny, if it's a part of the game, no one thinks that.
Well, that's it. I mean, you are an enemy until you're a friend.
Definitely. 100% true.
Yeah. And that's what people forget. It's like, if you're not part of my tribe, you're part of someone else's. So
that's 100% true. That's a great way. That's a great way of putting it. And that's how people feel. So you need to do something that distracts their brain from that thinking and brings them to another place. And then people just answer the questions. Because it's funny because I've had like 5,000 or more people play this game and I'm doing in workshops and I never have had anyone come back afterwards and tell me that they felt like, man, these were really too intrusive questions. And they're, no. Or like, wow, I'm wondering why all these people are asking me these questions, or geez, I can't believe I was that vulnerable. I feel bad now, right? I mean, no one ever says that. And so that's the point. I mean, it's that people want to be in this place. So if you start from that place, you will be way more successful in everything you do, because it also lets your natural talent shine. It lets you shine and let you be authentic in this process as well, and not hide or not try to be someone else that you think you need to be and put on a mask, because no one wants that. And everyone can tell that that's who you are. And that's part of the process and why you're not successful. But teams don't understand this. And the leaders and managers don't understand this, and so they try to do things like give people perks.
Right. And
that perks don't create belonging.
Yeah, certainly not long. I mean, they might have an instant sugar rush to them, but not an enduring one.
That's a great way of putting it. It's a sugar rush, because it's really interesting, because I have a client of mine who has franchises, and one of the franchise owners overpaid their salespeople like ridiculously. Like, I mean, way more than anyone else in the system, but they didn't give them any equity and didn't make them owners. And so it was really funny. After they sold, everyone was mad.
Oh, yeah. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen it where the owners say, well, salespeople don't get equity because they get commission. Well, do you want them bought into the company's mission or their sole quarterly, annual mission?
Exactly, right? And I go to that back. That's caring. That's looking out for people. Because if you're an owner and you're in a situation like that, the reason you give equity is also because you care about them and want to look out for them, and you realize that will be a nest egg waiting for them as this thing matures that they won't have, because most people aren't going to be setting aside all this money on their own. That's just human behavior.
Yeah.
Right? But that's the mentality you have to create in an organization, because then people will give you the best of themselves. And that is how you make more money. You're more productive, innovative, and rise to the top. And so it's a fascinating process in strategy that organizations by and far are missing. And you'll see companies like Warby Parker come out of nowhere, right? And I think that's a fascinating company because, that company took on like the biggest company, like one of the monoliths and monopolies in sunglasses, because one company owned all these brands. I mean, everything that you would buy. And the glass, the people, manufacturers, everything in the whole supply chain, and they pretty much displaced it all and are creating this company out of creating what I'm talking about now and their employees. And it's fascinating to see, but there are blips of that around, but it is really small and they are really hard to find.
Excellent. Hey, this has been a great conversation, Jason. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I also want to make sure you're checking out b2brevenue.com. There I have a free ebook on how companies buy. And if you haven't gotten it, check that out. It'll really help you in B2B sales and understand how companies make purchasing decisions, how they are organized, what are the political elements, what are the administrative elements. This is where deals go to die. We all think that sales is just about the conversation, and it's so many elements. You got to play the whole game. And the first part of playing the whole game is knowing the game you're playing instead of just responding. If you're just responding, you're in service. You're not in sales. So what we have to do is define our game and make sure that we're playing it. For those who are in the courses, please make sure you check out the first chapter. The first chapter shows everything about office hours as well as how to schedule a one-on-one. I'm loving the one-on-ones. This is one-on-one coaching with me. Imagine that. Imagine all that fun. Sitting down with me over Zoom, applying the course to get you into the accounts that you want to get into or close the deals that you want to close. And it's all included in the price of the course. Now, you can either pay with the monthly payment, 12 monthly payments, or all at once and save some money. Up to you. Expense it. Make it smell like gas, I say. Who's to know? Put it on the old tax deduction as training and education. This is what life's all about, isn't it? It's about learning. Are you open-minded? Are you really going to crush it this year? Guess what? This year is going to go by, whether you like it or not. You can't hold your foot on the brake pedal of life. Time just keeps on going. It doesn't consult us. So why not learn how to close sales? Why not talk to somebody about how to close that sale? How about hearing how other people are having this type of success? I'm telling you, you got to do it. Invest in yourself. No one else will. You know that by now. Also, make sure you're checking out the show notes. Last weekend, I interviewed Ryan Longfield over at Gong. He talks about what he's looking for in reps. Do you know that there's two other podcasts? I got Sales Questions, Brutally Honest Answers, which is a 7-day-a-week podcast where we talk about all the things that you care about, as well as the B2B Revenue Leadership Show. Check that out if you want to get into management. So check out those two podcasts. Let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed the podcast, tell a friend about it. Maybe a salesperson. Stop by LinkedIn, see any of my content. Are you checking out the YouTube channel? Tons of video. If video is the way you like to learn about sales, got over 1,000 videos there. All free of charge. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.